Hi, critical thinkers. I hope this live broadcast of Critical Mass TV finds everyone snug and content on this Sunday, December 21st, 2014. It is winter solstice tonight, the longest night of the year. The extended darkness giving us very little excuse for not cranking up our wonderful brains and devising ways of maximizing justice. In this, the supposed season of peace, let's leverage ourselves to create some in a lasting way. Obviously, busting out some mixed mental arts to pump up our collective intellectual defense. Tonight's show is another Black Rose edition. The Black Rose, Rosa Negra Anarchist Federation has a local here in Burlington, Vermont. And tonight, several of us are taking current headlines from the media, applying some analytical heat, and rendering a working people's context from the muddled miasma that is corporate media. The backspin doctors, if you will. The opinions expressed are not necessarily of Vermont Community Access Media, although they obviously should be. From Black Rose Burlington, I would like to once again introduce Emily Reynolds and Colin Flood. How's it going, you guys?
Awesome.
Here we are again. And of course, thank you for joining me tonight. So what my idea was, which I've sort of kind of just sprung on these guys here in the last few minutes, is to grab some articles and headlines from this past week or the past 2 weeks and try to add some context and to reframe some of these interesting issues and things that have come up both locally, nationally, and worldwide, and to try to the best of our ability, to just give an anarchist and a working person's context, a viewpoint, to add our viewpoints, and to sort of pull these issues back into focus and have them make a little bit more sense to just an average working person. Of course, the corporate spin benefits the advertisers and the people that own the media. So the first thing we're going to do tonight is we're going to watch a video that Elizabeth Warren, the senator from Massachusetts, gave last week, having to do with Wall Street and Citibank and Citigroup in particular. We also have another video that has to do with Shumlin, Governor Peter Shumlin's caving in on Vermont's single-payer law. And I repeat, law. It's not something he can really cave in on. And a report on New York State and Governor Andrew Cuomo actually growing some cojones and banning hydrofracking in New York State. So those are the three videos we're going to be working with, but we're going to obviously add a lot more on top of that. So let's go ahead and if Anders can hear me, let's go ahead and play that Elizabeth Warren speech, and then we will be right back.
Mr. President.
The senator from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for yielding the senior senator from Maryland and the senior senator from Vermont. You both show extraordinary leadership, and we learn from you every day. Mr. President, I'm back on the floor to talk about a dangerous provision that was slipped into a must-pass spending bill at the last minute solely to benefit Wall Street. This provision would repeal a rule called, and I'm going to quote the title of the rule, Prohibition Against Federal Government Bailouts of Swaps Entities. On Wednesday, I came to the floor to talk to Democrats, asking them to strip this provision out of the omnibus bill and protect taxpayers. On Thursday, I came to the floor to talk to Republicans. Republicans say they don't like bailouts either. So I asked them to vote the way they talk. If they don't like bailouts, then they could take out this provision that puts taxpayers right back on the hook for bailing out big banks. Today, I'm coming to the floor not to talk about Democrats or Republicans, but to talk about a third group that also wields tremendous power in Washington, Citigroup. Mr. President, in recent years, many Wall Street institutions have exerted extraordinary influence in Washington's corridors of power. Citigroup has risen above the others. Its grip over economic policy making in the executive branch is unprecedented. Consider just a few examples. 3 of the last 4 Treasury secretaries under Democratic presidents have had close Citigroup ties. The 4th was offered the CEO position at Citigroup, but turned it down. The vice chair of the Federal Reserve System is a Citigroup alum. The undersecretary for international affairs at Treasury is a Citigroup alum. The U.S. trade representative and the person nominated to be his deputy, who is currently an assistant secretary at Treasury, are Citigroup alums. A recent chairman of the National Economic Council at the White House was a Citigroup alum. Another recent chairman of the Office of Management and Budget went to Citigroup immediately after leaving the White House. And another recent chairman of the Office of Management and Budget is also a Citi alum, but I'm double counting here because he's now the Secretary of the Treasury. Now, that's a lot of powerful people, all from one bank. But they aren't the only way that Citigroup exercises power. Over the years, the company has spent millions of dollars on lobbying Congress and funding the political campaigns of its friends in the House and Senate. Citigroup has also spent millions trying to influence the political process in ways that are far more subtle and hidden from public view. Last year, I wrote Citigroup and other big banks asking them to disclose the amount of shareholder money that they have been diverting to think tanks to influence public policy. Citigroup's response to my letter: stonewalling. A year has gone by, and Citigroup didn't even acknowledge receiving my letter. Citigroup has a lot of money. It spends a lot of money, and it uses that money to grow and consolidate power, and it pays off. Consider a couple of facts. Fact 1, during the financial crisis, when all the support through TARP and from the FDIC and the Fed is added up, Citi received nearly $500 billion in bailouts. That's $500 billion with a T. That's almost $140 billion more than the next biggest bank got. Fact 2, during Dodd-Frank, there was an amendment introduced by my colleagues, Senator Brown and Senator Kaufman, that would have broken up Citigroup and the other largest banks. Now, that amendment had bipartisan support, and it might have passed, but it ran into powerful opposition from an alliance between Wall Streeters on Wall Street and Wall Streeters who held powerful government jobs. They teamed up and they blocked the move to break up the banks. And now Citi is larger than ever. The role that senior officials played from the Treasury Department played in killing the amendment wasn't subtle. A senior Treasury official acknowledged it at the time in a background interview with New York Magazine. The official from Treasury said, and I'm going to quote here, "If we'd been for it, it probably would have happened. But we weren't, so it didn't." That's power. Mr. President, Democrats don't like Wall Street bailouts. Republicans don't like Wall Street bailouts. The American people are disgusted by Wall Street bailouts. And yet, here we are, 5 years after Dodd-Frank, with Congress on the verge of ramming through a provision that would do nothing for the middle class, do nothing for community banks, do nothing but raise the risk that taxpayers will have to bail out the biggest banks once again. You know, there's a lot of talk lately about how Dodd-Frank isn't perfect. There's a lot of talk coming from Citigroup about how Dodd-Frank isn't perfect. So let me say this to anyone who is listening at Citi. I agree with you. Dodd-Frank isn't perfect. It should have broken you into pieces. If this Congress is going to open up Dodd-Frank in the months ahead, then let's open it up to get tougher, not to create more bailout opportunities. If we're going to open up Dodd-Frank, let's open it up so that once and for all, we end too big to fail. And I mean really end it, not just say that we did. Instead of passing laws that create new bailout opportunities for too big to fail banks, let's pass Brown-Kaufman. Let's pass the bipartisan 21st Century Glass-Steagall Act, a bill I've proposed with John McCain, with Angus King, and Maria Cantwell. Let's pass something, anything, that would help break up these giant banks. A century ago, Teddy Roosevelt was America's trust buster. He went after the giant trusts and monopolies in this country. And a lot of people talk about how those trusts deserve to be broken up because they had too much economic power. But Teddy Roosevelt said we should break them up because they had too much political power. Teddy Roosevelt said break them up because all that concentrated power threatens the very foundations of our democratic system. And now we're watching as Congress passes yet another provision that was written by lobbyists for the biggest recipient of bailout money in the history of this country. And it's attached to a bill that needs to pass, or else the entire federal government will grind to a halt. Think about that kind of power. If a financial institution has become so big and so powerful that it can hold the entire country hostage, that alone is reason enough to break them up. Enough is enough. Enough is enough, with Wall Street insiders getting key position after key position and the kind of cronyism that we have seen in the executive branch. Enough is enough, with Citigroup passing 11th hour deregulatory provisions that nobody takes ownership over, but everybody will come to regret. Enough is enough. Washington already works really well for the billionaires and the big corporations and the lawyers and the lobbyists. But what about the families who lost their homes or their jobs or their retirement savings the last time Citi bet big on derivatives and lost? What about the families who are living paycheck to paycheck and saw their tax dollars go to bail out Citi just 6 years ago? We were sent here to fight for those families. It is time, it is past time for Washington to start working for them. Thank you, Mr. President.
Okay, so I guess it would be fairly obvious about why I thought that video was important to show. Number one, it wasn't very widely disseminated on, in any corporate media. Number two, I mean, she is a United States senator and has her own agendas and whatnot. She is a financial, I think her professional career was in finance, so she's very knowledgeable. But in this particular issue, mainstream Democrat or not, she's taken a fairly courageous stance there as far as, calling clearly and openly for breaking up the big Wall Street cabal, I really, none of us are financial experts. Something that is really clear and obvious and was the inspiration for Occupy Wall Street was just the completely out of control nature of these giant Wall Street institutions and then the power that they wield. I mean, I think she said 12 people from Citibank, Citigroup, and I know there's at least 8 or 10 top Wall Street executives that are in the really high levels of Obama's administration. So the Dodd-Frank law that was passed after the recent financial collapse, supposed collapse, where TARP was initiated and the banks and the auto industry got their giant bailouts. What she had mentioned that that Section 716 of Dodd-Frank, which separates again the speculative derivative side of banking, and it separates that from the basically the insured activities of commercial banking, like you were talking about earlier, Colin, where the FDIC or Federal Deposit Insurance covers those activities. Well, what the Republicans were successful, and of course with the complicity of the Democrats in the spending bill, which was authorizing the federal government to spend money this year, so they didn't shut it down again, which has been a tactic. With the repeal of that section of Dodd-Frank, they've completely unfettered Wall Street again in that quick motion. If you see how that was done. And if that is not screwing working people again back up against the wall, I mean, it's so flagrant and so blatant.
Yeah. Well, I think this is what Elizabeth Warren doesn't actually kind of get. It's really interesting to see a senator being so pissed at the banks.
Right.
But there's like some liberal naivete there about like, well, what do you think the state is for? The state is like the pooling of resources by capital and different sections of capital to solve collective problems, and they're always going to do what they can to stabilize the existing system. I think what pisses her off most is that Dodd-Frank was an attempt to stabilize capitalism, and one section of the capitalist class is being selfish and tearing the whole system down with them.
Right.
With their Wall Street shenanigans. But yeah, the state, after the first crash in 2008, there's another one coming, no doubt, they could have paid off everybody's mortgages and credit card debt and student loan debt, and they could have wiped the slate entirely clean
with
a
trillions
fraction
of dollars
of the money they spent bailing out the banks. And then what recession? If nobody has any more debt, everybody has what's the recession, right? And the banks would have failed, and no big deal. But that wasn't what the state did. The state stepped in to save the banks and let them keep on doing what they're doing.
Right, because even at that high level of Wall Street multi-billion-dollar banks, they're parasites on the system. I mean, that is technically a very apt description about their actual business model. They perform no valuable function except to extract money and profit off of every single possible nuanced transaction that you could ever even dream of. And that partially got them in trouble with the derivatives and reckless casino kind of like banking. Another really important thing to realize is it would have been advantageous to do it when the banks were reeling a little bit, but like North Dakota does, the state bank model or community-based banking where local communities in a decentralized way, we can perform all of these financial functions in a non-profit way.
Yeah.
Which, guess what, a nonprofit bank would help us do is have interest rates that are phenomenally low, if existent at all. We could have no interest loans. We could perform all kinds of financial services for each other while we reorganize the system. But to keep them empowered and to not move towards community banking is criminal.
Yeah, literally.
It is literally criminal.
Like Wall Street, this is what people don't get. Wall Street has always been a casino. There's no difference between saying, well, should we put money in this enterprise and hope it succeeds, or this money and hope it, and saying, I think this horse is gonna win the race. There's no functional difference. You know a lot about horses, great. It's still gambling, but it's moved on now. At many points in American capitalism, they just engage in naked, open criminal activity.
Yes.
What people forget is in 2008, it was fraud. They systematically defrauded millions of people.
Yeah.
That it was a Ponzi scheme in the classic sense, and all of those people should be in jail. Like that's even the point being the state never serves the law. The law always ends up serving the state, you know. And
Which is why it exists.
right. And so I don't know. We shouldn't be surprised. This is always gonna keep happening until we overthrow capitalism.
Right. Well, go ahead, Emily.
Okay.
Certainly.
And I mean, this was just a flat out redistribution of wealth. Like that's what happened when this bailout happened. Like people who had never been able to afford houses were basically convinced by like really rapacious capitalists who like put them into these loans that looked great on paper. Originally, it was like, you know, really low interest rates, but then 6 months later, the interest rates jumped to like 20%. And like a lot of people have never had this at all, so they can't afford their mortgage. Or I met somebody in Minneapolis, and I was just like so appalled. Like this woman was an undocumented worker, and she'd been an activist for a long, long time. And you know, she was even paying her mortgage, right? Like she had it automatically deduct every single month. And 1 month, the bank forgot to take her money, so they put her into default. And so the only way to like win her house back would have been to go through the court system, and then they would have deported her.
Yeah.
And this happened to millions of people because they mainly targeted like low-income people, people of color, migrant workers, to people who are not even, you know,
They would
coming
call
from
them
a
not
totally
financially sophisticated.
Right.
different perspective. And the fact that these companies failed, like, you know, sometimes you'll hear the libertarians who are like, well, we just need to let capitalism work, right? Like the reason that this is happening is like, yes, the state is at fault, and also like capitalism is at fault, because they're like, oh, well, if we just like eliminated the state and eliminated the centralized power, then like capitalism would just do what it does. Except for they don't understand that this is what it's gonna do. Like it's gonna require
You brought up a great point right
this
there.
didn't even work the way it was supposed to, right? Like these businesses under
Well,
their model.
nobody
would have failed.
really believes that markets actually function. Nobody in there, I mean, that's the propaganda, and that's what's always shoved at us, that the market's going to take care of it. The market's there's nothing that capitalists fear most, and bankers and planners at high level, is the actual functionings of markets, because they fuck up all the time.
Right.
The you know, and the uncontrollable, the boom and bust nature of actual market economics, nobody is going to risk and expose their backside, put it that way, to market economics. But that's a very good point. And, you know,
That's what's so interesting about, you know, Elizabeth Warren, is that like these guys don't understand that the system that they feed off of requires some regulation. That's what the state is for. You know, you have all these massive corporate interests in this country who come together and create the government to say, like, you know, the system only works if we all make it work. You know, like, and these Wall Street people are saying, you know, screw it, like we'll just tear apart everyone else's industries. Like they pissed off a lot of people and defrauded a lot of people. They defrauded their big corporate clients.
defrauding corporations and state pension funds.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Tremendous amount of, you know.
So they're like
The auto industry.
I mean, like bourgeois democracy in this country has always been, under the original Constitution, only 5% of the population could vote.
Right.
You know, the founding fathers were very explicit about it. It was
We
to
weren't
be
people.
slave owners and big bankers
And
and lawyers, landowners. Yeah, all the people who had money were going to create this government. Only 5% of the population could vote under the original Constitution. And it was a way sort of pooling, you know, the collective resources to like regulate the markets and make it work for everybody, you know? And that's still the system we have today. You know, we've gotten the vote. It hasn't really translated into more political power for working people, but that's still what's going on when you see these crises of the state. It's different parts of capitalism jockeying for power.
Right.
And Wall Street is out of
Which is
control.
why there's so much crossover, obviously,
Right.
between the state and capital. So
Right.
it's not like, you know,
It's
that's
the-
why they're not divorced. And
Right.
we see this like rolling, like people from JP Morgan or
Right.
Goldman Sachs, they're coming into the government because they recognize that that's a place
Yeah.
where they want to push their agenda.
She's talking about all these people in Citigroup and government, like, and she's like horrified. But it's like, well,
But
yeah, that's the way the system works. Like the state and capital are becoming increasingly indistinguishable, which just shows what the relationship was all along.
Right. A lot of that has been PR and spin and propaganda. There's never really has been a strong firewall
Right.
between the state and the corporate sector.
Right.
One could make a very strong argument that the entire federal and state infrastructures are extensions of business.
Absolutely.
And their role is like a refereeing kind of a
Yeah.
role too, and it's a collectively agreed upon umpire-referee kind of a relationship. And you know how refs get screamed and hollered at? Well, that happens a lot.
Yeah.
You see a lot of that because a lot of these industries are fundamentally adversarial to each other. They overlap in their adversity. They all have that the neoliberal mentality and the corporate capitalist push thrust. But there's a lot of their the details are in conflict with one
Right.
another. So you need that refereeing role.
Right.
All of which is a complete fucking waste of money and time and resources. And who's paying for all that? You know, the double effort of everything, redundancy and masturbatory fucking stuff. We're paying for it
Yeah.
in the prices that we pay
Yep.
for services
And in our
products.
taxes, yeah.
And that's another thing. People just do not. These are just basic. That's economics 101. Maybe like 7th grade economics, and it still doesn't even sink into these fucking master's degree or PhD'd economists and planners. But I have to give Elizabeth credit, just in the standard sense, that it does take some intestinal fortitude to get up there and go after one of the most egregious of our corporate sectors. I mean, it's
Could I put in a quick word, too?
Absolutely.
I also think that like an important thing, because I really do resonate with a lot of things that Elizabeth Warren's saying, and I think what is really interesting about the state, and even the left doesn't really seem to understand, is like, even let's say that like 400 of the most revolutionary, most radical socialists were like, let's all run for office, and somehow there's enough, like maybe at this point in history they could all get elected. People are pretty angry, I don't know where the hell the
With
money's
electronic
gonna come from.
voting machines, we just
all
have
right,
to pay
so
somebody.
let's say we get 400 to the bone revolutionary socialists into Congress. That's still not going to make socialism, right? That's still not going to. The system is still going to work this way because these are representative people, and they're like 400 people fundamentally cannot represent 350 million people.
Absolutely
we have
not.
to represent ourselves, and that means we need to build a workers' movement. We need to be building workplace democracy, and that's going to function entirely different than a representative system, because even if we got all these people in the same room and they weren't joking, they're still not the teachers, they're still not the doctors, they're still not the firefighters. Like, they don't actually know what's happening on the ground because they don't do the job.
Again, that's the incredible structural weakness is that they're not just undemocratic. The systems and everything that we participate in is highly anti-democratic. It actually crushes and smothers democracy in the crib.
Yeah.
So that's the flip side of it. It's one, strengthening that corporate capitalist sector, but also strangling the democracy and any tendency towards democracy, meaningful democracy.
Right.
And that's why we have the police, right?
And the
Make
police
sure
are there to make
the
sure you're
strikes
strangled.
Right.
Right.
won't
They hold the
happen,
blanket,
to
they
make
hold the
sure-
pillow on your head.
Well, this whole analysis of the state as the collective, as the referee of different interests in capitalism really puts the liberal-conservative divide in debate, because what these debates between Democrats and Republicans is really about is how are we going to keep people going back to work? How are we going to keep capitalism stable? More welfare, more police, or both? Do we need bailouts or tax cuts, or what are we going to do to
Send
keep
more
people
jobs
going to work?
overseas,
Right.
manufacturing.
But the point you make is really the central one, which is we don't actually need any of these people to run our lives ourselves. We have jobs, we can run those jobs ourselves. Management is solely there to make sure that we keep doing it. We don't just say, this is stupid, let's go pave a road.
Take it over.
We can organize our own management.
Exactly.
I mean, we can do that.
And government is there to make sure that we don't do that. All the capitalists pay taxes to hire police, basically, is what it comes down to,
Right.
And so it's like you said, we need to have just a workers' movement to take back what we built.
A smokescreen for classism, and we'll get to it later and hopefully in another show, but racism is another fundamental smokescreen for the classism, which is the dominant hierarchy of economic classes, and we know that's where the power comes from. So we are now going to move on to our next video, and this headline is New York State bans fracking. So if Anders could play that one for us.
So a story broke this week, which was fairly disheartening. Apparently, the governor of Vermont, who's a Democrat, wants to scrap the plan to implement a single-payer healthcare system in the state. And they were supposed to get it done by 2017, but he says that for various tax reasons and reasons involving Obamacare, the numbers just don't work right now, so they're not going to do it. Now, it's strange because he's legally obligated to do it. Like, the legislation already passed. You can't just decide now, like, yeah, no, we decide to not do that. Well, that's too fucking bad. You have to do it. So it's weird that he's saying we're not going to do it when he's obligated to do it, and it seems like he really doesn't want to do it. So the whole situation is just weird. But here's who is pissed. The people of Vermont. They protested in front of the State House. According to reports, it was very angry. And number one, they brought toast. They had a big plate and had a whole bunch of burnt toast on it, and they had a sign with it that basically warned the governor, if you don't follow through with this, your political career is toast. You're done. Okay, I think that's a genius protest move. In fact, I was angry. I never thought of that. I'm like, fuck, every single protest should have toast now. So they're scaring the state government that way, but also, and this I like even more, you know what they decided to do? Burn their medical bills. I could not love the protesters in Vermont on this issue any more than I do. Now, understand something. I don't disbelieve the governor that it's a difficult thing to implement a single-payer healthcare system in a single state when the rest of the country essentially has one version or another of a private healthcare system. I don't think it's an easy thing to do. I believe him when he says that, hey, this is actually going to be more expensive than we thought it would be, and this would require massive changes to the budget, massive amounts of reallocation, and it would require new legislation through the legislature that maybe they wouldn't get on board with, and this might lead to deficit issues, yada, yada, yada. I believe him that it's a hard issue. And I don't think he's necessarily a bad guy because I haven't seen much that indicates before this that he's unreasonable or that he's bad on policy. He seems to be a pretty good Democrat. In fact, he campaigned on the idea of single-payer health care. But my response to all of the concerns that he raised would be, do your fucking job. Like, this is why they elected you. They elected you because you made a promise about this. I get it, man. You might have to be up day and night for 4 weeks straight, working hard just to get the ball started rolling in the right direction, right? You're a politician. You don't know dick about implementing a healthcare system. But there are people that do. Call the experts. I mean, there are experts on healthcare in other countries who've set up insanely great systems. Single-payer healthcare systems, all different sorts. In Britain, they have public dollars funding a public system. In France, they have public dollars funding a private system. They have a totally different system in South Korea, for example. It's a different kind of universal healthcare system. So there's so many ways to do it. It just requires you actually buckling down and doing your job. So let's say you have to, hey, sorry, we have to get rid of the startup business tax cuts in Vermont. Or I'm just making up a policy there. Fine, then you have to do it. Hey, we're going to have to raise taxes 2% on the middle class. Well, look, if they're fine with that, and it appears like they are, by all means, go right ahead and do it. Hey, we might have to petition the government for some federal help in building this. Hey, that's fine. In fact, there's a provision in Obamacare that allows for that, for states themselves to set up single-payer healthcare systems. Don't tell me there's no way to do it. There is a way to do it. You just don't want to do it as much as everybody thought you did want to do it. So the people that are out there protesting are right. And I have to say, when I read the kind of protest that they're doing, where they're burning their medical bills, I thought, if only we all had the balls to do that at a federal level. Because you cannot be the one douchebag who burns your medical bills. You cannot be, honestly, if you're trying to change the federal system, you cannot be a group of 1,000 people that burn your medical bills. Not going to do it. You can't be the group of 10,000 people that does it. You need to have a march or a protest or a gathering where you have 1 million people or so all burn their medical bills and promise and refuse to pay their medical bills to really get the system scared and to really get them to act and do real systemic change. Obamacare is a step in the right direction, but it's just the beginning. We know a single-payer system is better than that. We know a public option is better than what Obamacare was, which is a free market approach to attempt to fix the system. So we should demand that we at least have a public option, and we should schedule some sort of protest where 1 million of us burn our medical bills, because when we're all united, it's hard to fight back against that. I mean, if the civil rights movement taught us anything, it's that.
My organizational ability, this obviously was Shumlin and single payer is the issue. There was many headlines in the last few days. It was kind of shocking to me when I read it. I mean, it was just all of a sudden, oh, okay, we can't do it anymore. There's an 11.5% tax we're going to have to implement. And
yeah, I didn't think he would actually ever like say that. I knew he was trying to get out of it, but I didn't think he'd just say, you know.
He had a good point there that it's a law. Act 48 was passed. It's not something that the governor, does he have the discretion to just say, well, you know, I'm not into it right now, you know, so fuck it. I've had a lot of pressure from the other side, and we just can't do it anymore. I
wish I could say that about a lot of laws.
I know. I guess we could selectively choose which laws
Great.
we're
You know what?
going to
I really
obey.
want to smoke my weed tomorrow, so we're just
I know.
gonna
Officer,
pretend
haven't
that's
you
the
heard
real-
what the governor said? You don't have to
He
obey
said we don't
laws
have to
anymore.
obey the laws, so
awesome.
get out of my house.
There's two things that this is also, this argument, and the speaker there, and I can't remember his name, I'm bad about that, but he made some very good points, and I love the way he presents that. But there's a couple of things that are completely being ignored. Number one, what about the big onerous premiums and co-pays that everybody's already paying?
Right.
Why do we have to sock businesses and individuals with extra taxes? What about reallocating that resource and then we pay into a state-managed, to get going, a state-based or community-based nonprofit insurance company?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's
And
really
you
not
replace
complicated.
Blue Cross, Blue whatever the hell it is, and with that system, and then you get the ball rolling.
Yeah.
And then the nonprofits aspect of that would save billions of dollars.
Absolutely.
And then and then, of course, the profit margins. I mean, some of these aspects of the operations of an insurance company are up to 300% margins that they feel that they're completely entitled to. And it ranges from 5 or 6% to 300%, depending on what aspect of their revenue stream you're looking at. But you know, removing those parasites again out of that industry, which, you know, the question boiled down completely is it okay for people to profit off of other people's suffering? Is it okay?
Well, can I give you some numbers on this?
Please.
Too? Okay.
You're the professional.
So I'm going to be a midwife, so I'm pretty invested in universal health care because right now, you know, I'm an EMT as well, and we just are constantly seeing people are dying because they can't get medical care when it's really affordable, and they're not going to the hospital until it's so expensive and so disastrous that you'll see people with diabetes who could be completely managing their disease, and they're showing up in the ER and they're having to get their legs amputated because
That's the first time they go.
Because that's the first time they go, because they know they can't afford to buy the $30 to $150 a month medicines, which is a drop in the bucket for the state system compared to the $100,000 it's going to cost to amputate. So first off, we already have a single payer system, right? We already have universal health care, and that it's no longer legal to just let people die on the steps of the hospital.
Gotcha.
Which used to be legal. So luckily we as workers fought back enough that it's no longer legal for ERs to refuse people. Like they can't, there used to be stories of people would show up at the emergency rooms and they'd be transported to 4 different hospitals until they've died and they didn't get even an ounce of medical care. And so now people have to get treated at the emergency room, which is incredibly expensive. So even if we just are eliminating that, it's going to cut so much cost and so much agony.
With
first
preventive care.
Right. But then some numbers. So like my employer pays $400 a month for me to have health care. I pay some of that. I think I pay like 120, like 60 or 120. I don't know. They take it out. But so every month, $400 is going into health care, right? So let's multiply that by 12. That's like $5,000 a year that's being paid to health care, right? And then there's an out-of-pocket max of another $5,000. So every year, there's a possibility that I'm going to be paying $10,000 for my health care, and I make $30,000 a year. And I'm 23. Like, I go to the doctor once a year max.
Right. You're not one in the expensive demographic.
Right.
No.
And like, so that should be like, that money could be used to be helping people who are costing the system more money, and eventually I'll be in that population. But like, there's no reason that every single person in Vermont is spending $5,000. It's just going to CEOs that are making, some of them millions of dollars doing literally nothing.
Right.
Like, in the healthcare industry, it's like well known that about a third of the cost is administration. Just like administrative work. Where in Norway, if you go and they've had a universal system for a long, long time, the administration costs are 2 to 3%.
Right.
Which sounds a little bit less ridiculous, and nobody's making
Yeah, if you look at like a hospital structure, you look at the people that are paid to chase down the big insurance, who are trying to avoid claims. They spend millions of dollars trying to avoid claims, or billions, depending on the scale you're talking about. So you have to have a large chunk of administrative personnel to dog them and chase them and try to get compensated. Again, it's a criminal waste of resources and money and time. And it isn't, it's not the lack of courage amongst the people that are actually, participating in the system.
Right.
It's that we are totally disenfranchised and not empowered and atomized, and we don't know what the hell to do about it.
Totally.
So how do you challenge them?
Well, this is the thing that frustrates me, I think, the most about capitalism is nothing in capitalism is done for human benefit except by coincidence.
Right.
The whole purpose of capital is to grow and expand and move. And by any means necessary. So it's like, we make this awesome new medication, nobody can afford it. Oh well, we'll just sit on it until somebody can, and people die. And it's the market has created this situation where something like 30 or 40% of hospital costs are going to chasing down insurance claims.
Right.
When you'd think like a hospital should be in the business of like providing care.
That would be a useful thing for medical professionals to be doing.
If they have to chase down bills, they've failed as an institution. If that 30% of their resources are going, it's a complete abject failure.
Right. You go I work in the state bureaucracy that manages the healthcare system, and basically in a way tangentially I'm involved in the healthcare industry. But what I do is so far removed from the actual provision of care. You start to get a sense of the scale of the problem. Like, there's no reason if we were all on a desert island and somebody there was a doctor, that doctor would probably provide care for free, and everyone else would give the doctor whatever they needed. And there's no go-between. There's nobody I'll take some of this doctor's coconuts for introducing you to the doctor. It's ridiculous. And I bet that if you cut the fat out of the economy and just do work that actually matters, that is physical and helpful, we'd all be working 2 or 3 hours a day.
And be getting dividends instead of paying taxes. I mean, we should, and I don't mean just financial dividends, I mean reaping incredible benefits that we can't even imagine. Because if you are being taxed on your income as just a working person making whatever, 20 or 40,000 a year, that is also criminal. Because we, as the people that facilitate all of these different aspects of the economy, we should be getting a dividend check as investors in the system. I mean, that would be more of a meaningful.
Well, they do that in Alaska with the oil. The oil industry pays a dividend to everyone, but every industry should.
That was a bribe.
Right. Because all the money produced in the economy is produced by our labor. That's the thing, like, we forget. And, like, the whole apparatus of our society is dead weight.
So let's move on now. Okay, did you have one more point
Yeah,
to bring
just
up?
the like big point is that like the reason that this doesn't work for Shumlin is because he doesn't rate, like he specifically in his like, he didn't say this publicly, but if you look at what he's saying, he's like, oh, I can't raise taxes on anybody making more than $280,000. It's like, so you're okay with charging 10% to a family making,
I know.
$40,000 or less?
But they are
you won't
okay.
raise 10% from anybody making over $250,000? Like, no, this is an abomination. You said you were going to do this, and we're going to make you do this.
Yeah, the person in
You
the
know,
one-bedroom house can't apply any political pressure to his
Exactly.
ass.
Exactly.
And cannot put his ass on the fire. The upper-income people are organized, and they know, and they're sophisticated, and they can put his ass on the fire.
And Shumlin's one of them.
Vermont is actually, and most people don't know this, the propaganda goes totally a different way, but Vermont is one, other than New Hampshire, Tennessee, and Florida that don't have a state income tax, Vermont is like the 4th most wealth-friendly state in the United States.
Yeah.
I mean, the tax burden, and that's measured in a different bunch of criteria, but a lot of it is taxation. They really have a very nice, easy ride in Vermont, and the details are out there. It was also a story that I read it just a couple months ago. But let's move on to fracking, because it does have a lot to do with Vermont gas and the pipeline here. If we could now see that video on New York State banning fracking, Anders, I would really appreciate it.
New York environmentalists are celebrating the state's decision to ban drilling for shale gas, which has left energy executives reeling at the same time. The man behind the move, Governor Andrew Cuomo, got a round of applause from grateful activists outside his office. New York's banned fracking after a report on the associated health risks and is the second U.S. state now to do so after Vermont. Marina Portnaya picks up the story.
A 6-year campaign led by environmentalists and anti-fracking activists proved victorious this week. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo announced that hydraulic fracturing will be banned in the Empire State due to mounting health concerns. The decision came after a long-awaited study by the New York Health Department found significant public health risks associated with fracking, including water and soil contamination as well as air pollution. Even New York's acting health commissioner admitted he wouldn't want his own family to live in a community where fracking is taking place. New York banned fracking in 2008 so regulators could conduct an environmental review. In recent years, as the New York governor traveled around the state, he was shadowed by protesters who showed up at his events demanding that he impose a statewide fracking ban. Governor Cuomo also faced pro-fracking pressure within his own administration. In October, staff members were accused of editing a federal study on fracking in order to play down the health risks. Activists say Cuomo has demonstrated courage and national leadership by not caving to political and corporate pressure.
New York is serving as a beacon, a shining light and example to other states and activists in other states that they can stand up to industry. And when people tell them to, sit down, shut up, and just get with the program, and that it's inevitable, they're going to lose, the special interests will prevail, that's no longer the case.
Fracking is a process in which water and chemicals are injected into shale to free oil and gas. It's currently allowed in at least 32 states, with the biggest booms in Texas and Pennsylvania. Earlier this year, I visited fracking sites in Pennsylvania where citizens are continuously protesting the environmental dangers and pollution they say their community has suffered. While local communities across the country continue mobilizing to stop fracking, New York is now leading by example. Marina Portnaya, RT, New York.
Well, in Britain, meantime, where fracking is flourishing, iconic fashion designer Vivienne Westwood went to Downing Street to present the Prime Minister with a rather unusual Christmas gift that wouldn't have been very welcome. It was a box of asbestos. She wanted to remind David Cameron of the lethal contamination of that from the 1960s and 70s, warning that fracking, she thought, could be the UK's next disaster. At present, obviously never made it over the threshold, but Dame Vivienne did manage, nonetheless, to deliver an open letter from 150 high-profile supporters of the anti-fracking campaign. And among those putting their signatures to the letter are Beatles legend Sir Paul McCartney, also Hollywood star Jude Law, comedian and activist Russell Brand, and the artist Yoko Ono.
Paul and Yoko.
So that is really very interesting. Of course, in 2008, Cuomo did sign a moratorium on fracking, so they have had an ongoing moratorium. I personally, I didn't have any faith that I actually thought that he would cave and that we would hear something similar to what the mumbling of Shumlin about single-payer health care. I really thought he was going to bail on that. So I was surprised.
Yeah. Well, it's good. I'm surprised too, but it goes
I
to
think
show.
I think it's because people built a movement. Like the anti-fracking movement is massive. You know, I was on Move On calls because they were giving money for people to do anti-fracking work, and like there was 1,000 people who were on these, and like 5,000 people had signed up to try to get grants. Like people are really taking this on and building movements, and you know, people sent hundreds of thousands of petitions, and rallies were some of the biggest the state's ever seen. So I think Cuomo, you know, the state's kind of in a complicated position at all times, right, in between like these corporate interests and attempting to look like they're serving the people so that the people don't just overthrow them. And so I think that like because he faced so much pressure and because there's just consistent and passionate activism, I think he couldn't back down.
Yeah, right. Remember the crisis of democracy in the view of the Trilateral Commission and the capitalists. The crisis of democracy is people participating in it, which is an interesting concept, but that's very real. So it was also interesting that Cuomo had always said he was going to wait to see what his scientific representatives, the health commissioner and the conservation commissioner, and waited until the reports were done and came out. They were both extremely critical about fracking from the health department and from the New York Conservation Departments. Dr. Howard Zucker and Joe Martins are the two different respective commissioners. So they identified threats to the water, soil, and air, a lot of them extremely dangerous, the absence of meaningful health studies, any at all, and proof that the drillers can protect the public at all. There's zero. And of course then is the diminishing economic prospects with like the plunging value of energy right now as far as, you know, the way capitalists measure a barrel of oil or a cubic foot of gas or whatever. So for all those reasons, of course, New York sits on both the Marcellus and Utica shales. The Marcellus shale is highly exploited in Pennsylvania, and they're trashing the shit out of large sections of Pennsylvania. You know, frack till you crack, I wrote down here as one of my notes. Commissioner Dr. Howard Zucker said his counterparts that he has spoken to in other states where fracking is taking place, none of them were ever even consulted before high volume fracking began. Not another health commissioner. So, I mean, again, a little pat on the back for New York State. Let's link this with the Vermont gas pipeline. Of course, the Vermont gas pipeline, again, as we've gone over multiple times, is an attempt by Canadian corporation Gasmetro using Vermont gas as their proxy to ram a pipeline through Vermont to feed a paper mill, International Paper in New York, but also to connect to the national grid, which then connects it to the Marcellus shale, and then they can backfeed and do whatever they want to distribute. The other very interesting aspect of this story in Vermont is what just happened with Vermont Gas the other day and their new CEO.
Well, I mean, a little while back, the initial cost estimate was $86 million for the pipeline, which I would be paying for as a Vermont Gas ratepayer, as somebody who uses natural gas to heat
now, just
my home.
phase one.
Yeah, just phase one, which goes
out of
down
a three-phase project.
Right. But they concealed the fact that it was actually $121 million. It was actually going to cost $121 million, and they concealed that fact from the Public Service Board until after the Public Service Board had approved the project, which is illegal. So they got a $35,000 fine. I think they assumed it was worth it.
Cost of doing business, right.
Now we find out that it's, in fact, the price tag is $154 million. So it's almost doubled since the beginning of the project. And I think we can take some credit for that as activists who have delayed it like a year or two
At least
now.
a year?
And it's just...
And made people aware of a lot of the other issues. I mean, there is a lot. It isn't just about feeding a few thousand people with new gas furnaces and stuff. I mean, there's so many other issues involved which the corporate media does not do a good job about informing everybody so we can make a balanced decision. And Rising Tide and 350 Vermont, Just Power, Critical Mass TV, we've done our best to try to get the message out there, what the other issues that are involved.
I mean, one thing I would like to be mentioned in every news program about this pipeline is that 99% of the gas, 99%, is going to a paper mill in New York.
All right.
That is the most salient fact. You know, like look at what Rendell's saying. The new CEO is saying it's so important we put this in the context of giving Vermonters the choice of a clean energy source for heating their homes and businesses, helping them save money and reduce their carbon footprints. Set aside the horseshit about the carbon footprint and just point out 99% of the gas is going out of state to a single paper plant. He doesn't even mention that. He's like, we want to put this in this context of saving Vermonters money by charging the ratepayers $150 million and blah, blah, blah. Like, this is purely a project. Like, International Paper is paying for the pipeline, like an enormous chunk of the pipeline. It's entirely about this one corporation. And it's ridiculous that that isn't the center of the debate, you know?
The other thing is, this is all from the Burlington Free Press on Saturday. The investigative, and I'm using that term very loosely, the investigative journalists crafting the article didn't challenge him on any of those frickin' statements.
Right.
Those are obvious half-truths. I'm going to use a nice terminology there. If you are not challenging that speaker on those issues and then articulating it in the article for real meaningful balance, then you are a propaganda rag.
Just ask, hey, what about that? What about the paper mill? You know, like,
yeah,
do you
how
want
does
to
that
comment on the
fit
paper
in?
mill that's paying for the project and that 99% of the gas is going to? No, I'd rather talk about the Vermonters who are heating their homes. Let's talk about that.
So, and now phase 2, which is from Middlebury over to the paper mill, the company itself, Vermont Gas, now has actually requested that the Public Service Board of Vermont stop their hearings and put it into a holding pattern until they can do better cost analysis of phase 2.
Well, yeah.
Which, you know what that is? That's International Paper saying, you know what? Our number 6 fuel oil just went down to rock bottom. We don't want your freaking gas anymore, man. It's a pain in the ass. All your damn hippies over there are raising hell, and we don't want to deal with this. It's a bad move. So they're just going to keep the number 6 fuel oil coming. So, and then another part, I know we only have a couple minutes left, but it's in the Addison Independent just here for Thursday, Cornwall and Vermont Gas pipeline deal, and Shoreham, Vermont. So at the same time they're pulling the plug on their project in phase 2, they're down signing deals with Shoreham and Cornwall just to hedge their bets in case it does sort of work out, to offer them money and a little swinging watch in front of the select boards. But both of those towns are going to bail. And our friends Randy and Mary Martin, who are property owners in the area, the quote from them in here is, "There is more to life than money." And I love Randy and Mary. They're awesome.
Yeah.
So we have about 1 more minute left, you guys. Anything else anybody feels strongly about?
Yeah, fire your boss. Organize with your coworkers to seize control of the means of production.
Woohoo! All right. Well, thank you very much for tuning in to Critical Mass TV. It is winter solstice, so celebrate our longest night of the year and really get motivated. Let's work on some issues this winter. Pick up some good activist reading material. Join with your neighbors. Pick an issue and frickin' go for it. You're never going to feel better. So thank you guys for coming and joining me. I really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure.
It's nice to have Black Rose a presence in Burlington, Vermont. So thank you very much. We will see you next time.